Greetings and welcome to the BlastCast. I am Jarus, and with me as always is the guy who lives in the danger zone, Lightning Dragon.
Oh yeah.
Well, as you all know by now, at least I think you do, Evocati is now up and running, and I want to say redacted. Now, Evocati days are always kind of a knife edge for video content. What I know versus what I can say and what they've released for public discussion. So I'm going to try to be very careful. I don't want to break an NDA, so bear with us on this episode. So let's jump into Around the Verse first. First of all, CIG showed off their new Area 18 landing zone. Now, I do love the architecture. What I like about it is how it stands out from the other buildings in the environment. It's very visible. It's very easy to pick out among basically a whole city planet. And obviously very, very red.
It reminds me of Air Force Base, kind of.
Yeah. You know, there's a lot of it's very smooth. It's very flat. It reminds me a lot of Lorville, but the thing with Lorville is that it doesn't really distinguish itself very well. In fact, many times when we come in from that, you're kind of coming straight down, mostly because of the no-fly zone. But it really doesn't stand out, and this really stands out. And I hope they take some of the thoughts here and they bring them back into Lorville. But hopefully with the revamp on the no-fly zones, you can come in at a better angle than basically nose down right now. Hopefully what it does is it just gives you a minimum flight height, that the same way they're going to be doing on our Corp, and let you come in at a much more reasonable angle than of descent. Now, what I would like to see with that big flat top that it has eventually is the ability to land on it, like put a proper runway on there. I know that's proper runways or a proper landing as far as wheels and stuff go is on the agenda, but there's definitely plenty of room up there for those. I don't imagine it'd be too hard to retool it. You know, put some lanes on there, you know, places you can taxi off to and get off and get in an elevator or get into a shuttle and then it flies you to the main concourse. There's definitely room to do that.
You'd have to probably make it so there was hangar bays that you would kind of drive into and they would close.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Would stop. Yeah, because they'd have to stop rendering your ship, right? I mean, they couldn't just leave it out there.
Yeah, that's true.
It would make more sense to have it where you drive into a bay rather than like, oh, we just despawned your ship, right? The ship's not been despawned. It's just, you know, in the hangar.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of ships when they're like on pads and things being, well, I mean, Elite Dangerous does it. Some other games I have, like for example, X4. When you land on a pad and the pad's needed, actually the doors open up, that your ship descends, then basically the doors close and their ship can land there. And it's like your ship's being stored, but it's being done in a very cool way that doesn't break immersion. And of course, they showed the roads that go through with all the traffic, and these are the lanes that the public transport is going to take. I would like to be able to use them with my own ship, but the odds are that's never going to be the case. This is more of an aesthetic.
Yeah, unless they had it where you had a cruise control takeover, but I'm pretty sure they said they don't want to do that, or at least not yet.
Yeah, who knows what's coming down the line. Now, CIG also showed off some very important turret control changes. Now, what these changes are is you're able to dial up or down your rotational speeds, allowing you to increase or decrease a range of motion with movement. Now, why this is important, as your target gets closer or farther, having more or less speed will give you more accuracy to actually get those shots where they need to be. How useful this is going to be to adjust on the fly, or how effective, obviously that is something we're going to have to get our hands on. We're going to have to go ahead and really feel this out. I'm not against this move. In fact, in a lot of ways I think it's really, really smart.
Being able to automatically adjust for ranging and sensitivity, especially if you're using the mouse, right, and you have mouse wheel, that'll be nice. The only problem with it is, I always say every time, is the turrets can't be restricted to the movement of the ship. So if your pilot, you know, turns left, your turret that you're in shouldn't also turn left with him.
Yeah, it needs to be decoupled from the movement of the main ship, absolutely. But I think that's something that they said a long time ago that they're doing anyway. I think to some degree it may already be in. We don't play on turrets too much because we've been waiting for...
They're just bad.
Well, yeah. It's been more of a pain, so we more do other missions than combat ones the way it stands right now. Looking forward to the day that I want to do combat missions. Now, they did show off the gimbal assist feature. Now, this has been a big source of controversy on the forums and whatnot. A lot of people calling it an aimbot and things like that. Though, honestly, the closest thing we have to an aimbot in the game is probably ESP. But what it does is it shows you a ring of tracking. Basically, you put the enemy ship in the ring, the gimbals slew over to track the target within that ring. Now, if the ship comes out of that ring, the gimbals aren't going to slew to the target, and we don't know how large or small this eventual area is going to be, and it does separate itself from IM, but from what it sounds like, that they still have IM. They have like IM, and then they have, you know, where you're using IM just as a virtual stick, and then the guns are tracking independently. What I'm concerned about with here is that, as you know, what they tried to do, and I'm not even begin to say it was successful, is they tried to balance IM and fixed with these gigantic weapon damage disparities. And my question is if you're adding a third layer, and the first time you tried to balance these two things instead of just having universal controls, how are you going to begin to balance that? You haven't been successful with those, you know, zero order and first order. The way I look at it is that IM's just going to have to go. You can't balance 2, and you're not going to be able to balance 3. But overall, the idea of an automated system with reasonable slew rates, that's fine. That puts the focus on flying as opposed to shooting. Shooting should be the result of good flying and good positional combat. Good steps and complications within it.
It makes sense if this is a system that is going to be replacing IM, as in IM being removed and this being tacked onto a VJoy to make it so that gimbals are usable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that they get some sort of understanding of that. And maybe, you know, like a lot of things, sometimes people have to keep, to some varying degree, bashing their head on the same wall until they realize that they're not having much success. So hopefully, if they're looking at this, you know, and they've come to realize the balance implications, and realize that, you know, wow, this will work fine if we just didn't have this one factor, then my suggestion would be to remove that factor. CIG also showed off the updated variants of the Reliant. They all have a pretty nice distinct look inside, and they've even added a bit of cargo to some variants that didn't actually have the cargo initially. Now, honestly, these Tier 2 starting ships are starting to look very interesting, and I'm impressed with what they come up with. They look way more functional, or having unique functions, than I was expecting. I do love my missed ships, of course, well, except for the overly large dashboards. But generally speaking, you know, it's a little tempting sometimes to get one of these just for bombing around, but I've got too many.
We can get them in-game with in-game money.
Yeah, I should consider that someday. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into Reverse Diverse. Now, it was with David Colson this week. To avoid breaking NDA, which is always something I try to be careful of, what I've chosen to do is take what I feel is the most important bits of that conversation, and I'm going to show them to you. And I've added some text of my thoughts about what was stated, where I feel it's necessary. And it's relatively short, but I'll get into my thoughts about things I've experienced with the new flight model, when the NDA is not a factor, and of course during the course of development things change and are modified, and you know, so any statements I would have about
something you feel right now, you know, may change. So
yeah, everything can change all the time, and that's the thing, is that even if I was willing to do something like that stupid, the thing is that like it would be irrelevant probably. You know, a lot of things I talk about may be irrelevant in a week or so. Who knows? But that's the nature of development, right? I mean, you test. You give feedback, they listen to feedback, they make changes, you come back and test again. That's what testing is. So the comments on the video are only about things that were said, and I said I wish I could say more, but I really can't.
The flight model is purely just moving the ship, so things like the gunnery, the weapon balance, the shield balance,
armor,
all of that stuff, that is not the flight model.
Gotcha.
It's worth noting as well that those things are not balanced and designed in isolation from the flight model. They're just different things. So you sort of have like your shield balance and your weapon balance and your flight model balance. And the combination of all three of those goes into the balance of combat.
Will physiological G limits affect players in multi-crew ships who are not in the pilot seats?
In this case, no, we're not going to see any changes to this because it's...
In 3.5.
Yeah, in 3.5, we're not going to see any changes to this. The conversation at the moment is that the inertial dampeners of the ship interior have limits. And so For the most part, in usual maneuvers, you won't feel anything. But if you slam into an asteroid or another ship slams into you, or you pull at a really hard maneuver, then the character will react and you'll get a hit feedback or you'll be moved or whatever.
There's a threshold.
Yes, there's a threshold. So above that limit, the inertial dampener just can't help anymore.
Gotcha. Will fighters have the acceleration to rotation rate ratio necessary to maintain an angular advantage against one another, thereby enabling positional combat?
And this is a really difficult balance because we have reduced the rotation velocities of ships in 3.5, but we've also reduced the accelerations of the ship. And that is sort of bringing that ratio down and not really changing, or bringing the two numbers down and not really changing the ratio that much. So it depends on the ship. Like, we've obviously got some variation between the ships, but for the most part, the ratio has gone up a little bit, so that distance is a little bit further away, but it's not a huge amount further away than it was previously. And it's just purely because to get that ratio, or to get that distance that you need to be able to do that, if we were to get that above 100 meters, we would need rotation rates that are quite a lot slower than we're comfortable with, right? So what we're gonna try and do is we're gonna have larger fighters that have these slower rotational velocities, and in that case we can do that. And so the smaller, lighter ships can probably do this sort of thing, or at least they will be able to track targets that are following them, and certain ships won't be. This is something that is super, it's super top of our priority when we go to Evocati and test this out. This is what it's like in the current iteration that we're going to put out in Evocati, and we are 100% up for changing this and shooting this in the next month or so.
With Hurston, ArcCorp and all the planets and their moons have vastly different atmospheric densities. Will the new flight model take that into account, as well as the difference in density at ground level versus the edge of space?
So basically the simple answer is 100% yes. The new flight model is a little bit more lenient toward ship balance. So previously, you know, if you were to shoot a thruster on one side of the ship, and then every time you tried to move it would like spin because it was just out of balance. We don't do that as much anymore. We kind of, you know, we give you a free pass in that respect, just to make the game a little bit easier to manage. So what you will feel is reduced thrust in a certain direction. The ship will still be quite stable up to a point, obviously, when you just completely lose everything. The ship will be quite stable, and you'll just lose thrusters, or you'll lose acceleration, and so the result is that it feels sluggish. And you might find that it's like asymmetrical, so it's sluggish, strafing in one direction and not the other, which feels really cool. It forces you to sort of change how you're flying in the middle of combat, which is fun.
How will large ships behave differently?
They don't behave any different in terms of mechanics, right? They're only different in terms of tuning, and they're really slow and really sluggish. And some of the really big ones are actually have so little thrust that they are impractical for atmospheric flight, which is kind of what we originally wanted. Like, if you have something as big as the Bengal, you can't come into the atmosphere. So I think the example that's in 3.5 is the Reclaimer. That's the salvage ship, right? If you come into the atmosphere in the Reclaimer, it really slowly like drifts down, and you will like pump up as much as you can. It'll just keep drifting down. It just won't be able to. Don't bring it into the atmosphere, I guess, is the tip. You won't be able to get out.
Okay, now are you saying that if you land or reclaim, there's no way to get back up to space?
Yes. You know, as ships get larger and larger, they get slower and slower until eventually they reach a point. Like, for example, I think the Starfarer can get out of the atmosphere, but it's really slow. Like, it's like, you can see it struggling and struggling, but it will do it. It just takes ages. Like, for example, the Starfarer can escape from Daymar, but it can't escape from Hurston. So this HUD is now your true speed indicator. If you strafe left and right, it is telling you your velocity in any direction that you're going. And furthermore, as a result, I think there's another question there, you can actually change that speed limit. So Christopher, if you move your scroll wheel up and down, you can actually change that speed limit up and down. You also notice that it goes red. When it goes red, it means you're above the combat maneuvering speed. If you want to make a nice, really soft landing, you can set the speed limit to like 1, and then the ship will really slowly move down and land. Or you can set the limit up to 1200 and fly at what used to be cruise.
You said earlier that that we're slowing things down.
There's an interesting balance here because the combat that we have is still pretty fast-paced compared to other space games. But it was previously, like, accelerations were so fast that it was almost too difficult. And, like, for example, when you were trying to aim, it was almost impossible to get a target on someone because they could just, like, do this, and, you know, it really struggled. If you have rotational velocities that are super high, and you have rotational accelerations that are super high, it feels like an FPS shooter. And that's not what we want. We want you to feel like there's some mass, and you kind of need to swing the nose around and stuff.
Ships seem to just kind of hover and float sometimes in atmosphere, much in the same way they do in space. Is that changing with 3.5?
That is not changing with 3.5. Straight away you'll notice that it doesn't bump itself up every time it comes into an obstacle like it used to do. So the hovering tends to be a lot lower than it used to be. And you sort of get this, like, feeling of being a little bit more attached to the ground. We also have, like, variable grip effectively. Like, obviously it's not tire grip, but if you, like, lower the bike, which you can do with control in space, you can, like, change the hover height. If you lower the bike, you actually get more, like, lateral turning grip, so you can do tighter turns if you're lower, and then you press space and you'll kind of hover a bit higher, which is safer, and you can travel without bumping into things, but you also can't turn as tightly when you're hovering a bit higher.
When you have a ship targeted, ESP will sometimes pull you a little closer to that ship than maybe sometimes you want.
So ESP has been weakened generally, so that effect is not as apparent as it once was. Although I think what we kind of want to do with ESP, which won't be in the first Evocati, but it is a super high priority, and it'll be done, like, you know, it'll be out in the next version, is having a little bit more nuance to the control of ESP. So, for example, if you try and pull off the target, ESP will know straight away, oh, he actually doesn't want to target this person, and it'll just back off. Or likewise, if you're not putting any inputs at all, then it will not do anything because it knows that you're not trying to aim right now. This is a really good example of how the bigger ships, like, work. If you, like, try and turn, you'll see straight away that it's so much slower than the Gladius. It also is not nearly as aerodynamic, so it's not getting so many of the sort of, like, lift forces that you get with aerodynamic ships. And so it's sluggish and it's kind of difficult to control. This ship actually has enough thrust to hold itself up in the atmosphere, so you can escape. Ship glides. It will do this for quite a while, and then it works. You just don't have that much control.
Will the ship physical profile actually affect atmospheric flight?
We do simulate what are called lifting bodies. So surfaces that have the sort of geometry to support lift, but are not necessarily wings, can generate some lift, but not very much. The left bar that is moving up and down there, that is controlled by the scroll wheel now. At the CitizenCon presentation, we had the acceleration strength, or the acceleration magnitude was controlled by the scroll wheel. We've actually removed that because we found that it just wasn't that useful. And we found that modifying the speed limit was actually far more useful, and so we've gone with that instead.
I think right now the altimeter is set to sea level and not the actual ground level that's beneath you. Has there been any discussion about like an actual altimeter from the ground that's below you versus an altimeter that's just at the hard sea level?
Is this useful information that is worth taking space on the UI for? And right now, I don't think it is. But I'm open to discussions on that, and, you know, in future iterations, maybe we'll revisit that.
Is it possible to do banking turns in 3.5?
It is actually preferable, like what is happening right now in atmosphere. You can turn harder like this than you can if you just yaw for a second. You'll see straight away. Can you, like, rotate with your mouse yaw? You'll see that the ship kind of gets pulled back into the air. And you can't turn nearly as tight as you were if you were to roll and turn.
Yeah.
In space, it kind of depends on the acceleration balance of the ship. So ships that have stronger downward accelerations will be able to turn tighter if they roll, and other ships may not have that capability.
All right, now Lightning, you watched the video, and you said you had some thoughts on it from what you saw?
Really only two, but yeah. So the very first one they were talking about was done with the flight model, and they were talking about how they're separating flight model from gunnery, weapons, armor, shields, all those kind of things. And it's nice to finally have them say this, because we've talked about it a long time, that it's been a problem, especially with the damage disparity between weapon sizes, right? Size 1s currently, barring any changes that happen, are effectively useless. In fact, we were using them in a recent gameplay session. I mean, not so recent anymore, where we were firing at a cutlass, and we basically couldn't do enough damage to take its shields down because we had size 1 weapons. It's nice that this is now being openly discussed.
Yeah, that's true. That's been the whole balance thing that we've been dealing with because of IM. It was supposed to be a mechanic to help new players initially, but it's become one that's will cause hamstringing of new players when they're size 1 gun on their Auroras or whatever, and they can't shoot open a can of beans, let alone do anything of value because the damage spread they've created with it. It's one of those things. It's like training wheels that have absolutely become stumbling blocks. It's not a good system.
The very end part in the reverse the verse, they're flying around on the planet, and there's a part where they kind of just effectively stop the ship, do a really hard lateral left turn.
Yeah.
And there's some G-forces being applied, but if you're looking at the ground and you're watching, it looks like the ship effectively just stops in midair and just spins 180. And from what it sounded like they were talking about in this is part of the new flight model, so it doesn't really look like a whole lot has changed in here from that. But they talk about slowing down rotations and accelerations kind of in the same time, same ratio. So you're still going to kind of have an FPS, but with everything being slower and the gimbals and IM being what they are, and the just absolutely insane projectile speeds, it's going to be so much easier to just blast targets out of the sky. It's going to be like 2.6 all over again. That doesn't look like it's going to be good. It's really hard to say, but from kind of what I saw and what I understood he was talking about, that it doesn't look like it's going in a good place, so I hope some of these things are changing.
Oh, thanks for your thought on that, Lighting. I said I wish I could get more into everything, but as I said, NDA, and I'm not going to be doing that. So.
Yeah.
But
I can say whatever I want, but I've only seen what they've shown.
Exactly.
And,
so it's so
shown
hard for me
like,
to do this, and it's so hard for me to do it these times. But we'll get through it. We'll get through it, guys. Now, on that Evocati note, due to the fact that I'm in the middle of Evocati testing, and I want to spend more time testing, videos are going to slow down a little bit potentially until we hit the PTU level, and then I can talk more about it and show the systems and have discussions about them. So I will be finishing out the current gameplay sessions that I've recorded, and when they end, and I have a note at the last one, I've already rendered them today. I've been very, very busy, but that will be the end of the 3.4 series, and until 3.5 at least goes into PTU, they won't be picking up again. I want to focus very heavily on the testing, and video editing and stuff does take a lot of time, and that's why I put so much time into it to kind of clear my schedule today. Now below I'm going to leave a link to 2 very important videos that you should see. It breaks down the issues of why both rotations and projectile speeds are very important to how flight comes out. Now, if you have not seen them, please check them out. And the math speaks for itself. And both these videos are with MHE. He's a contributor to this channel, and when we played DCS together on this channel, he's a good guy. He's a pilot in the real life. He's done all these breakdowns for us, and the first video is the Rotation Conundrum, explaining why rotation rates are important, and the other one is the Projectile Problem, which shows you how overblown projectile speeds are and what this does to combat, where basically you can't get out of the way of incoming fire. So when you add in between these 2 videos, rotations being 100% time on target pretty much, and Projectile Problem being that now you're 100% time on target and now you can't dodge the weaponry or get out of the way of it, so you quickly see how it's basically like since space is big and empty, you add those 2 things together and what you get is an FPS with no walls, and there's two guys standing in the middle of the field just shooting at each other, and they have hit scan weapons. So, essentially speaking, or even if it has projectiles, it doesn't. There's no way to get out of the way really. The bullets are way faster than the person's going to move, and they're at fairly close range. And that's the point. Is that these videos we covered them before, but there's always new people coming in, and just check them out if you haven't. They're a little bit long, but I think you'd learn a lot from them. Now, as we close the show, I'm going to do something that's a bit unusual and share for those who have not seen it yet the new trailer for the F-14 for DCS, which will be hitting the beta server for play on the 13th of this month, and I can't wait. I'm going to be doing videos about this plane with Lightning Dragon and potentially with MHE next month. I'm going to try to be his Rio. He's a pilot, of course, and he's going to be gone for a little while, is what I understand. So when he gets back, hopefully by then I've trained up enough on the Rio position that I can actually be useful and not actually just accidentally hit the eject button, and throw us both out of the plane. Who knows? So anyway,
that means you're going to be my Rio.
Well, yeah. I mean, I could practice. That would be fine, and I'll promise that mine won't be bad. Maybe.
Well, I imagine we're going to be flying a lot with no AI to kill us.
yeah, that's true. All right, everyone. Enjoy the trailer, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye-bye.
I think we lost him. Where the hell is he? Man, we should back off. I don't like this.